Things were going well. Not perfectly, but well enough for you to notice. An opportunity had opened up. A relationship was growing in a healthy way. A project was starting to take shape. A period where, for once, the right pieces seemed to be falling into place. And then, for no clear reason, something changed. It did not come from the outside. It was not an external obstacle, bad luck, or a situation that was out of your control. It came from within. A decision you made yourself that undid what was being built. A behavior you took on that created exactly the problem that had not existed before. A form of sabotage that, from the outside, makes no sense at all. And the most disturbing part was not the result. It was that you watched it happen. In real time. One part of you watching another part act in a way that clearly went against what you wanted, and not being able to stop it. Then came the analysis. The attempt to understand. And the explanations that come up are always the same. Fear of success. Low self-esteem. Imposter syndrome. Self-sabotage. Words that describe what happens but do not explain why. Because if you truly wanted to fail, if there were some conscious desire to destroy what was being built, it would be simple. It would not need an unconscious mechanism. It would not need something that operates below your awareness, something you watch from the outside without being able to step in. Something deeper is happening, and it does not begin with your personal psychology. It begins in a world where success, visibility, and standing out inside the group were often more dangerous than failure, and your brain still has not received the message that the rules have changed. Come back with me to a world where standing out too much inside the group was not just risky, it was potentially fatal. Not in an abstract way. In a concrete, immediate way, with consequences that could unfold quickly inside the only environment where your survival was possible. Your ancestor lived in a small group, and inside that group, there was a dynamic that anthropologists who study hunter-gatherer societies have documented with impressive consistency across cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. A deep and systematic collective pressure against the individual accumulation of status, resources, or power above a certain limit. It was not a written law. It was not a declared rule. It was a social mechanism that operated in a distributed way, through specific behaviors that the whole group carried out in a coordinated way when someone started to stand out in a way that threatened the collective balance. Anthropologists have a name for this. Enforced egalitarianism. And it worked in ways that may seem cruel today. But in that context, they followed a very precise logic of collective survival. The member of the group who hunted significantly more than the others, who accumulated resources beyond what the group considered fair, who showed skills or achievements in a way that started to create a dominance hierarchy that had not been collectively agreed on, that member faced something specific. First came the jokes, the subtle sarcasm, the comments that diminished the achievement without attacking it directly. Then came the progressive exclusion from important decisions, the reduction in cooperation, the gradual distancing of allies who had once been close. And if the behavior continued without adjustment, a more serious kind of exclusion could come. Social isolation inside the group, loss of access to collective resources. In extreme cases, banishment. Why did the group do this? Not because of simple envy. Because of a much deeper structural reason. In a small group with no formal power structure, no laws, no institutions, and no external guarantee of protection, the balance of resources and power among members was each person's main protection against the tyranny of anyone else. A member who accumulated much more than the others, who became much more powerful, who stood out too much, represented a potential threat to the balance that protected everyone, even if that was not their intention, even if their visibility came from genuine competence and not from political ambition. The perception of imbalance was enough to activate the leveling mechanism. And here is the part that changes everything. The ancestor who could read these signals early enough, who could notice when they were standing out beyond the limit the group would tolerate, who voluntarily lowered their visibility, shared more, slowed down before the leveling mechanism was activated against them, that ancestor protected their position inside the group. And position inside the group was everything. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this ability to detect when your own success was becoming dangerous and to slow yourself down before the consequences arrived was selected as a real adaptive advantage. The result was an internal system for limiting success that operates automatically below consciousness, and that still activates a brake today when the individual begins to stand out beyond what the ancestral system classifies as safe. Not because you want to fail, but because, for hundreds of thousands of years, standing out too much came with a cost that the system was built to avoid. The reason why the brain sabotages its own success, the moment that success starts to become real, has an explanation that crosses neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and anthropology in ways that are rarely connected. And when you see the connection, the pattern stops looking irrational. It works like this. First step, the anthropologist Christopher Bohm from the University of Southern California spent decades studying hunter-gatherer societies in different parts of the world. His work, organized in the book Hierarchy in the Forest, documented something that appears with remarkable consistency in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. All the hunter-gatherer societies studied show systematic mechanisms for suppressing individual dominance. Bohm calls this egalitarian politics. And he argues that it is not some random cultural value. It is a collective survival strategy that emerges independently in groups that share the same basic structure of vulnerability. In a small group with no formal hierarchy, the uncontrolled accumulation of power by any one individual is an existential threat to the balance that protects all the other members. And the solution these groups developed in a convergent way is what Bohm calls a reverse dominance hierarchy, a mechanism where members of the group informally unite to limit the power of any individual who starts to stand out beyond what is tolerated. The evolutionary implication of this finding is direct and disturbing. If, for hundreds of thousands of years, individual visibility beyond a certain threshold led to consistent social punishment, then the individuals who internalize that threshold and automatically put a brake on their own success before the punishment arrived had a real advantage over those who did not have that brake. The system of self-sabotage is not a dysfunction that came out of nowhere. It is the internalization of a protective mechanism that in the ancestral environment truly protected people. Second step, there is a specific psychological mechanism that modern research has identified, and it connects this evolutionary foundation to the observable behavior of self-sabotage. The psychologist Carol Dweck from Stanford University, whose work on growth mindset is widely known, identified something in her research that is less discussed but just as important. In a series of experiments, Dweck and her collaborators documented that people with a history of environments where success brought negative consequences, criticism, envy, unbearable increases in expectations, and different forms of social punishment develop what she calls a success avoidance response. The system learns, through real experiences or through patterns observed in the environment, that beyond a certain point, success is not safe. And once this learning happens, it operates automatically, before any conscious analysis takes place, like a brake that activates on its own when the speed passes a certain limit. Third step, there is a precise neurological mechanism that explains why this brake is so hard to consciously turn off, even when the person recognizes the pattern and wants to change it. The social psychologist Naomi Eisenberger from the University of California, Los Angeles, documented that the anticipation of social punishment activates the same brain circuits that process physical pain. And here is the key detail. The system does not distinguish between social punishment that has already happened and social punishment that is only anticipated. When growing success begins to create visibility, when achievements start to become obvious to other people, the system that was calibrated to connect excessive visibility with social punishment begins to generate the same alarm signal it would generate if the punishment were already happening. The amygdala does not wait for the punishment to arrive. It anticipates it. And when it anticipates it, It activates the response before the event happens. The behavior of self-sabotage is, in this logic, the system's attempt to avoid the anticipated punishment by reducing visibility before it becomes too great. It is preventive protection. Painful, counterproductive in today's world, but still protection. Fourth step, there is also a specific layer of this mechanism that explains something many people describe very clearly, without understanding why. The feeling that they do not deserve what is happening. That it is only a matter of time before someone finds out they are not as competent as they seemed. That the success being built will somehow collapse before it ever becomes solid. This phenomenon has a name, imposter syndrome, and it was first described by the psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes from Georgia State University in 1978, after they observed the pattern in high-achieving academic women. But what is rarely discussed about imposter syndrome is its evolutionary function. The perception that your own success is illegitimate or temporary serves a precise systemic purpose. It keeps the individual in a state of emotional low profile, even when their objective performance would be enough to justify full confidence. And keeping an emotional low profile, feeling smaller than the results would suggest, was real protection in the tribal environment. The member of the group who internally felt equal to or smaller than the others, even when they objectively stood out, was less likely to display dominant behaviors that would activate the group's leveling mechanism. Imposter syndrome is not just unnecessary suffering. It is the echo of a survival system that said, the more you stand out, the more careful you need to be with how much of it you show. There is still one final element that completes this mechanism. The psychologist Baumeister, whose work on motivation and self-control is extensively documented, identified that self-sabotaging behavior often serves a function he calls protecting the self-image from future failure. The unconscious logic works like this. If I sabotage my own success before it fully solidifies, any failure that comes later can be blamed on the sabotage, not on my real competence. I will never find out if I was truly good enough, because I never allowed the process to reach the end. It is a strategy of protection against a test the system is afraid it will not pass. And the fear of failing that test is not only psychological, it is evolutionary. In an environment where failing publicly after standing out was doubly dangerous, because it created both the loss of status and evidence that the previous status may not have been deserved, avoiding the test completely was, paradoxically, safer than risking the conclusion. This system worked perfectly. In an environment where standing out too much brought real and consistent social punishment, where the group's leveling mechanism was unforgiving and had concrete consequences for access to resources and protection, an internal system that automatically slowed you down before visibility became dangerous was protecting you from something real. The break was proportional to the real risk. Then everything changed. And the brain did not get the update. The modern world not only allowed individual visibility, but often rewards it in ways the ancestral environment would never have tolerated. Careers are built on visibility. Opportunities are created through the public display of skills. Professional relationships grow through the reputation that success builds. In almost every area of modern life, standing out, being seen, and being recognized for real achievements is an advantage, not a threat. The context completely flipped. But the internal system does not know that. It still operates with the logic of the tribal group. It still monitors the level of visibility and status with the same alarm system it used back in the Paleolithic era. It still activates the brake when success starts to go beyond the threshold that the ancestral environment considered safe. And the result is one of the most frustrating experiences a human being can have. Knowing what you want. Having the ability to reach it. Seeing the path open up. And at the same time, feeling an internal force pulling in the opposite direction, without asking for permission, without offering a rational argument, simply operating. Picture the scene on a split screen. On one side, the ancestor starts to stand out inside the group. The alarm system activates. Visibility is increasing. The collective leveling mechanism could be activated against him at any moment. The internal brake is the right response. Lowering his profile now is real protection. On the other side, you are in a modern professional environment where a project is gaining recognition. The same alarm activates. The same brake starts to operate. But here, lowering your profile is not protection. It is a lost opportunity. It is abandoning something that the current environment would reward if you allowed it to happen. The same response. Contexts with completely opposite logic. And the modern world has created yet another element that amplifies this problem in a very specific way. The scale of possible visibility in the modern world has no historical precedent. In the Ancestral group, the highest possible level of visibility was being seen by 50 people you knew. The limit was physical, defined by the size of the group. Today, a single achievement can be visible to hundreds, thousands, and sometimes many more people at the same time. Success in a digital or modern professional environment can scale in ways the ancestral system simply has no category to process. And when the system detects a level of potential visibility that exceeds, by entire orders of magnitude, anything it was calibrated for, the alarm response can become just as disproportionate. The internal saboteur does not increase the brake in a straight line with success. In some cases, the greater the potential for visibility, the more intense the sabotage that comes before the success becomes solid. There is also something specific that the modern world introduced into the equation. Social media has made other people's success visible in a way that has no historical precedent. Your ancestor compared his own success with the success of 50 people he personally knew. The reference group was small, concrete, and limited. Today, the reference group is potentially unlimited. And social media consistently, and by design, shows people's highest moments of success, creating a distorted perception that everyone around you is standing out in ways you have not yet managed to. The result is a social comparison system working with data that has never existed at any other point in history, creating feelings of inadequacy that feed exactly the self-sabotage mechanism the ancestral system was built to carry out. The internal imposter finds constant evidence in the social media feed that your success is smaller, more fragile, and more temporary than everyone else's. And that evidence, as distorted as it may be, is processed by the system as confirmation that the brake should be applied. So what changes when you understand all of this? The first thing is recognizing that self-sabotaging behavior is not evidence that you do not truly want what you say you want. It is not proof that there is something fundamentally wrong with your psychology. It is not a mystery about your lack of commitment. It is an ancestral protection system running a protocol that was valuable for hundreds of thousands of years, in an environment where that protocol produced exactly the opposite of what was needed. The system is not sabotaging you because it wants you to fail. It is protecting you from a danger that no longer exists, and understanding this distinction fundamentally changes the relationship you have with the pattern when it appears. The SOE's psychologist Kristin Neff, whose work on self-compassion as a functional mechanism is extensively documented, identified that one of the most effective ways to work with destructive automatic patterns is not to fight them with willpower. It is to recognize them accurately. When the self-sabotaging behavior begins, when you notice that you are making a decision that goes against what you want, or that you are creating an obstacle where there was none, you can ask a question that is rarely asked in that moment. What is my system trying to protect right now? Not to justify the behavior, but to identify which ancestral threat the system believes it is facing. Too much visibility? The system is anticipating the tribal leveling mechanism. Success that goes beyond what feels safe. The system is hitting the brakes before attracting the collective punishment that in the ancestral environment would come next. Identifying the perceived threat creates distance between the alarm and the action. And in that distance, there is room for a second question. Is this threat real in the context I am in right now? The researcher Carol Dweck, whose work on the mechanisms of response to success we have already mentioned, identified that this ability to separate the automatic response from the conscious evaluation of the current context is what she calls growth mindset in its most functional form. Not naive optimism. not positive affirmation with no foundation, but the ability to question, in the specific moment when the brake is being applied, whether the current context truly justifies the same response that the ancestral environment would have justified. Sometimes it does. There are situations in the modern world where genuine caution about the pace of growth is adaptive and wise. But many times it does not. And recognizing that in the specific moment is what allows the behavior to be different. There is also something practical that research on this topic suggests, and it goes against intuition. The tendency is to try to solve self-sabotage by working directly on the sabotaging behavior. Trying not to do the destructive thing. Trying to stay on track when the brake is operating with intensity. But the researcher Gabriele Oettingen from New York University, who has extensively studied the mechanisms of goal pursuit, identified that working in the opposite direction can be more effective. Instead of focusing on the sabotaging behavior when it appears, focus on building, ahead of time, and deliberately, a specific and concrete vision of what success looks like after it becomes solid. Not as a vague fantasy, but as a detailed mental image of a specific future state, combined with the clear identification of the internal obstacles that will appear along the way. This process, which Oettingen calls mental contrasting, helps the system develop internal representations of solid success that compete with the threat representations the ancestral mechanism associates with standing out. It does not eliminate the system, but it gives it an alternative story about what success means in this specific context. And the last thing worth taking from this conversation is the most freeing one. The fact that you self-sabotage the moment things start going right does not mean you are afraid of success in the way that phrase is usually used. It means you have a nervous system that was built for a world where success beyond a certain point was genuinely dangerous. This system is not your enemy. It is part of you, part of the same architecture that kept you safe in countless other situations. The point is not to destroy it. It is to learn to recognize it in the moment it operates, so you can consciously decide whether the current situation truly justifies the brake it is applying. Most of the time, it does not. And this realization, repeated consistently over time, is what gradually recalibrates the system to the world you actually live in. Not the world it was built for. The world that exists now. If this video made you see your own brain in a different way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Because in the next videos, we will keep revealing the ancient mechanisms that still silently control the decisions you make every day. There is much more coming. And the next one will surprise you.